I'll let you know once we're there, and I'll get us started. Okay, I think we are.
Father Jeff Spencer's in the house.
Is that Jay? Okay. We're
yeah.
live.
Yep. Regular. I have a
Okay.
Zoom call.
So we are now live. I'm going to get us our link into the Telegram channel so that public can join us there. All right, so this is July Luna Den Town Hall. We have Dr. Jeff Spencer joining us today, which I'm I feel very honored to have you on, Dr. Jeff. So for those who are in the Luna Den community who are not familiar with Dr. Jeff, I'd rather you give yourself a little bit of an introduction, Dr. Jeff, but I will just say you've been a huge part of the Wolf Den. You've been a big part of a lot of the principles that we've been teaching on in this community, not necessarily just like the financial pieces, but the background of those financial pieces and where we're actually making decisions from. So yeah, I'll let you do a little intro and we'll get started.
Well, thanks, Courtney. I think the most important thing to always be mindful of is that, playing a big game is never an accident. It's very deliberate, and it's the intentional outcome of very deliberate actions that are consistently applied. And, certainly will and talent play a role in that, but they're not the distinguishing characteristic. It's really about, can we read the terrain? Is what we believe to be happening really what it is? And can we make the best choices against the presumed reality? And the idea is to have a collection of tools that we can look at life through. And if you see this, then it means it's going here, but if that's not where we want it to go, then let's do this to course correct. That's really the art of the game here. And you could be surrounded by marketing experts and sales gurus and all that type of stuff. And there are some, technical and tactical things associated with that. But unless you have a you that shows up with the capacity to identify accurately what the playing field really is, and based on that reality, apply real solutions that have been historically proven to move forward towards the target or the goal, then you're just guessing. And to the extent at which we guess, life becomes a game of roulette, essentially. And I feel that there's a big gap between how it's really done and how it's presumed to be done. And a lot of that is our human nature, and the things that we naturally have a gravity towards don't always work out in our best interest, even though they seem like they should. Well, they don't always do that. And the things that seem unorthodox or contrarian that will get us there seem too weird. So therefore we avoid it, or the experts ignore it, or they have something to say about it that discourages us from applying it. So what I'd really like to do with our time here, let's look through the lens of what are people really thinking and what are the real questions. And let's start with that rather than, the Jeff show up here doing a lecture. I would rather that we do this like in real time, because that's what I do. I work with people that my ideal is to help prolific achievers become prolific achievers by consistently winning big, guilt-free, without blowing themselves up. I mean, that's essentially what I do. And that's, I apply these actions that all become that. Like Elon Musk does this, so I do that, I become Elon Musk. Well, it doesn't really work like that, because we're a unique individual and we have the capacity, or we should be getting better at the ability to ask a better set of questions of ourselves and find answers that create a certain level of predicted outcome in our lives, rather than it just be like a giant guessing game based on hope and faith. And in that context, faith means doing things that we're not sure about and perhaps even are clueless about, and we're hoping because someone said this, it'll take us to the promised land. And I just don't think that that's the way that we want to do it, because that's a quick way of fumbling the ball, and too many fumbles with the ball, then we start to doubt ourselves and our confidence starts to erode, understandably. So, with that being said,
Cal, do you want to jump in with Dr. Jeff and start with questions, and then we'll let the community jump in? Cool. Oh, Dr. Jeff, you're muted.
I'm going to suggest that people think about their question in advance, so it's completely unambiguous. It's absolutely crystal clear in the fewest words possible. That way we can dig right into it, and we don't need a giant backstory. Just like, okay, what's the question? And let me sort of jump in and let's use our time like most effectively.
Yeah, wonderful.
So I just want to start with my assumption is that it's a you against you game when I pose my question. I think there's a big disparity between what we think is the reality versus what the reality actually is. Meaning that I think a lot of people say, I'm very risk adverse, or I'm in this for the long term. And then they realize that maybe conditions or their environment changes, and they realize, hold on a second, I thought I was a long-term person, but I'm really not. And I'm wondering, like, how do you reprogram or rewrite your mind to actually do the thing that you want to do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think the first part of this really reveals something of high significance here, because it's a very interesting thing, but you just mentioned the reality side of this and perceived reality. And the truth of this is that any goal that you have, any plan that you have, that's really a best estimate about a future outcome, assuming that the reality in the future will be what we perceive it to be now. And I don't see how you can possibly do that with a high degree of accuracy, because 90% of what happens in life doesn't ever turn out the way we think that it's going to. It's always something different. So I feel like the whole key to this is what I call adaptive fitness, where you're able to see what the reality is like right now that needs to be applied to the reality. But this also has to do with the human nature that we're born with, because our human nature that we're born with has a set of what I see to be these, should we say, hardwired myths that we believe to be true when in fact they're mythology. And I'm going to share with you kind of what that is as we talk through this. And if we look at human nature is highly predictable. If you give this set of data, you could predict that 99% of the people on the planet will interpret this as being that and take that action based upon a presumption. And these presumptions, people think that we're born as a blank slate and all of this is put into us, like we're born pristine and then we're corrupted, right, over time. I don't think that's really necessarily true. I think that are some survival instincts that we're born with that are irrefutable, because the body and mind's highest priority is survival. And it will do anything at all costs to survive. And the challenge with that is that our survival instincts are not based on excellence and progress towards bigger future manifestation. They're based upon survival. Like, well, what? Can you give me an example? Yeah, actually I can. So if there's a psychological situation that we're taken by surprise from that we consider to be a threat, have you ever said anything that you thought was going to be absolutely awesome to negate the assault that you're feeling under pressure? Well, yeah. Well, how did that work out for you? Well, it probably didn't work out so well, because the things that oftentimes we end up saying to ourselves, well, I don't know who that was that said that, but that's not me. Well, it came from you, so it can't not be you. Well, which side of you is that? Well, those are your survival reflexes that are doing anything possible to keep the mythology alive about what you believe about yourself to be true and reality. It's like a safety measure, but it doesn't work out, and it's not a good way of problem solving and trusting in to be able to make the right decisions, to be able to move forward. And I think we have some, another thing I'll say here is that survival is something that happens faster than we can think. Because when you have that hair trigger response that we've all had, where we say that one thing we wish we wouldn't have, but we did, and we don't know where it came from, well, that's our high-speed survival impulses that are hardwired into us that help us in survival, but they're not a recipe for living a life of, purpose, prosperity, and productivity, because it just can't like get us there. Where that would be a rigid like response to things. And I think we need to be mindful of that. Where on the other hand, the person that says, well, that's not the real me. Well, yeah, it was you. It was part of you, at least, because you're the one that said it. So where did that come from? Well, maybe it was hardwired into there. Survival is our highest priority. I mean, that's why the brain is put in the skull. That's why the spinal cord is put in the spinal column, because without those, you can't survive. And same thing with physical assault or danger. Like you slip on ice, well, your hand knows where to put itself to break the fall. Yeah. Well, how did it know how to do that? Because you didn't think yourself fast enough to do that, but clearly something was listening. You knew exactly where to put the hand to break the fall. So you can't say that something isn't there that's faster than we could think, that's deliberate and purposeful, that is useful in survival situations. But, none of those can take us to a life of excellence and high productivity and contribution. It can't take us there. The only part of us that can take us there is what I call the champion's mind. And the mind has no location in the body. It's like an emergent property that just kind of like is. You can't find a place and say, well, it lives here behind the pineal gland. It's not like that. It's remained elusive to physical description and location. So why that's important is that if you look at the mind has the ability to look at and evaluate in real time circumstances that the data can be stored, edited, interpreted, and transmitted in a very thoughtful way that leads to conscious application of actions that can take us to the destination. So I think we need to be very mindful of that, well, that's just me. Well, is it really? Or is that a survival you that you've identified with, that you are assigning you as being? Is that how we justify the out of control things that we actually do? Well, nobody necessarily put that into you. Yeah, I mean, look, babies don't go to school to learn how to crawl. They have an innate ability to crawl. Babies they don't go to school to learn how to stand up. At a certain point in their evolution, standing up is a natural progression. Teenagers don't go to obnoxious school to become obnoxious. Old people don't go to old school to be grumpy. There's a certain activation biologically that happens over time that can be anticipated. But if we don't understand the not us, the imposter, the real imposter syndrome is the things that we do that we didn't ask for, that are part of our human nature, that control our conversations and our behaviors. And that's where people get screwed up. And that's where people get blocked, in my opinion. So therefore, if we develop a champion's mind, that's not guessing, it's not impulsive action, but it's the ability to take historic information that we have observed that when applied can take us from point A to point B. I mean, there's a body of evidence out there that may seem contrarian to most, but in fact, and it will be contrarian to certain people that are on survival instincts, they'll think, well, you're crazy. Why would you want to do that? An example of that would be, so let's say I'm way ahead in an investment, and then I see that it's about as high as it can get or whatever, and maybe like we just did this recently with our house. I mean, the house is at an all-time, historic high. So we decided to sell our house. Well, why? Because we know that there's going to be a downside to this because we've seen it before. So why do we want to do this and then wait till it goes down and then do something? So we sold our house and we're living in what I call a filing cabinet right now, which is a 2-bedroom apartment. This is like by design because there are some historic reasons why we should do that. But a lot of people think, well, what do you mean? You're crazy. Where are you going to move? I don't know yet. Quite honestly, I don't know yet. I don't know the plan, but that's okay. We took the action on what we knew to be true. So, there's all sorts of conflict here where people that are ruled by their emotions consider some of the things that are done through the champion's mind that are historically proven to be true seem out of whack, and vice versa. So your question about what is reality, that's a process that takes time. And quite honestly, all due to respect to everything, it takes about 50 years to do a pass through life where you've kind of seen everything for the first time. Until then, you're kind of guessing at everything. And hopefully that the guessing that we do doesn't end up in significant, risk and liability to us by making, some mistakes that could be financial failure, financial ruin, catastrophic relationship failure, or like a health event. Hopefully we learn things sooner. That's called wisdom. And that's by, being around and kind of learning the lessons in advance that to protect us from doing things that lead us off the cliff, but we don't know that because it seems like it's the right decision. Can you give me another example? Sure, I can. I mean, how many times we all said to ourselves at some point, oh my God, this is Mr. and Mrs. Right. This is the most perfect person I've ever met in my life. This is it, man. This is going to be forever. And then 2 weeks later, you're saying to yourself, what was I thinking? I mean, how could I have possibly thought that that was true? Well, that's a good question, but yet we did. And so it takes time. And I feel like the idea is that let's be around wisdom. And most of us aren't going to believe it because we don't believe anything until you've been kicked in the teeth enough to realize that, maybe there are other ways of doing things. And maybe I'm not as smart as I thought I was. So, there's sort of a grace period up until your, later 20s or early 30s where, there are certain things that you get a free pass on during the experimentation time. But, the idea is to realize, well, and we can't help that because of our human nature. We're just driven to believe because we think it, therefore it is. Well, that's not always true. But if you believe it to be true, then you look at your track record, then you decide on what it is. And that's why I'm a really big fan of being involved with conversations and discussions where we're listening to what people are saying and we're looking and having a resonant check against what they're saying against our reality. And then we're kind of measuring that against the track record, with the idea, let's keep the learning curve and the scar tissue to an absolute minimum. And in that way, as we start to get it, then we can ride the wave without, some people lose a lot of confidence in themselves because they get beat up a lot because of the decisions that they make that don't end up well. And I can understand that. But so the idea is that we want to kind of limit that as much as possible by being around sound counsel that informs us that, as to your point, what is the reality here? Because I can honestly tell you this, is that at any moment in time, there's a fixed context with all things considered that represent the playing field that life is unfolding on. And if we can understand that, and then we can decide what we're going to do to take advantage of that to have the least friction path to our desired outcome. And I've said probably a lot here, and I hope it's not too much and that I haven't missed too many steps here in trying to convey what's taken me 71 years to understand and to discover, So obviously, my advantage, is my age. Just because over time we start to collect data and we have a library that we can hopefully refer to. Oh yeah, I've been here before. And because it is this, well, then we do that, So I hope that provides an insight here because, people think it's a mindset. Well, a mindset is rigid. Rigid means that if I do this, then I'm going to get this in return. Well, maybe this isn't you or this is partially you. So you may not get the results that Elon got from this, but you may get some of it. But most importantly, let's see if we can look at it through the eyes of what it really is and then make the right choices for us. And that's where the champion's mind versus the human mindset comes into it. Please tell me if that was too much. And if it is, questions that I could sort of fill in the gap or what you did understand and what you took away from that.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's too much. I mean, I think your answer was dense, much like life is dense, and there's a lot to process and a lot to understand.
Yeah.
understanding ourselves. Of course, when somebody has years of experience on you and you're receiving an answer, your brain is like, my brain just processed information that wasn't even in the realm of the answer. So I think I'm very intrigued by this idea of, circling around the sun enough times that life will be, rather than approaching it as a first time visitor, that I will have the ability to reference in my mind, oh, I remember when this, right? And visiting something for the second time, I think does much more control over yourself, your emotions, and your perceived reality of it. So that's kind of like my key takeaway.
So
Yeah.
my addition to that would be patient,
Yeah.
but also be around people that you have a gravity towards that you can learn from. That's another side of it. And just keep an open mind. And I think it's important not to try to live beyond your particular level of lifespan development where you are. If you're 30, don't try to act like a 50-year-old. There are certain things that in the 30s that we should be doing that are appropriate for the 30s. Don't try to act like you're 50 when you're not. If you're 60, don't try to be like a 20-year-old, because that was 4 decades ago. So there's a whole other conversation that we could have around that. And I guess we could say that life is messy, that life can be really complicated. It could be confusing. So I just, again, emphatically kind of take a position. Let's try to not guess and learn the hard way. Then the question becomes, well, okay, well, where do we go to get the real scoop? Do we go to our friends that have the same problems and concerns we do, and we listen to them? What do we do? It becomes really, I think, confusing, especially in today's world where everybody's like an expert and everybody's got something to say. So I hope that this helps.
It is very helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have Dicka has his hand raised, so I think we'll just kind of go around from there. Does that sound good, Cal? And just let people, you can chime in if you'd like. Dicka, you can unmute yourself.
Cool. I'll put my hand down if I can figure out how to do it. Sorry, I just worked out and it's hot and humid.
That's
so
good.
my shirt's off.
It's the sweaty bodies. That's great.
Yeah, trying to get back into it.
I'll
slow
be
and
one in a
steady.
couple of hours. Yeah.
Nice. So is there I think a lot of what you say, a lot of the Champion's Mind stuff comes back to first being aware of it, and then knowing yourself. And so my question would be, is there a way, in your opinion, to speed up the process, or at least get more out of the process of going from human mindset to champion mindset? Like, off the top of my head, obviously journaling and having that kind of self-reflection is good, but is there anything else you can do to be at a better position when you're 50 than someone who's not doing certain things?
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's a great question, because this sort of goes back to what we said before. Like, you can journal forever, but it's all about the interpretation of what you're writing. And the accuracy of that determines the progress that you'll make, whether the progress is up or where, the deceleration and stepping off the cliff happens. That's really where it is. And so as you go through life, the idea is to build a bigger library to recognize the patterns that are in front of you. Oh, well, I see this, therefore, this is what I should do. I may think it goes here, but history says that if I do this, then it will take me to the promised land. It seems kind of weird that it would, but that's what history says. See, that's always the biggest risk, as was mentioned earlier, is misinterpretation of the circumstances. That's by far the biggest risk all the time. As I've mentioned, well, it seemed a good idea to go out and buy that car. God, I swear that this guy was the most perfect guy on the planet. God, but then what happened? Yeah, I mean, there's always these checks against our presumption that do happen. So, as my cycling coach said when I was 13, last time I saw my dad when I was 13, and I had a cycling coach that eventually took me to the Olympics. Yeah, he did actually, because he awoke something that was already within me. He didn't put anything into me. Nobody could put anything into anybody. You can wake something up that's already there. You've probably been around people, like, no matter how many times you talk to them, that they're not listening. Well, it's only because they don't have it within them to listen. So more talking or talking louder isn't going to make a difference. So he just said that, like, winning is a learned skill, and I'm going to teach you how to win. It's a learned skill. You can try as hard as you want, but if you don't know the skill, you're not going to get to the winner's circle. So he said, you come and train with myself and my other Olympians and world champions, and I want you to be around the conversation, and I want you to listen to what we're talking about. Because if it's within you, it will awaken that within you. And then as you evolve, you will become that, because it is you. It's not like we're taking the you and turning you into something that you can never be. You can't take a lizard and make him into a penguin and stick him into the Sahara Desert. It just isn't going to work, no matter how much you wish that or journal it or affirm it. It just isn't going to happen. So again, I feel like the acceleration of the process is being around a conversation of sensibility that helps us interpret what we're perceiving through the eyes of reality. That's the most important thing ever. And as I tell my daughter, when I was raising her, we adopted her from Colombia at the age of 10. Very unusual adoption. Best thing I ever did, for sure, in my life. Biggest highlight, best achievement ever. I told her, look, we need to sit down and have a conversation here. You're not going to understand anything that I'm saying, and I don't expect you to. But I want to go on record as saying this, because eventually when this shows up, we've kind of preset the conversation where we can come back and we can have a discussion about it. Because I knew that you can't make anybody understand something before they get there and they have the life evolutionary process. Like when I was in junior high school, I swore I was never going to be like my dad, man. I'm going to be the coolest dad ever. I'm going to get the fastest car on the planet. I'm going to take all the kids to school. I'm going to give you a credit card. I'm going to let you stay out all night. I was going to be that dad. I was going to be the cool dad. And then as I started to age, I realized I was starting to talk like my dad. Like, look, there are some boundaries that we have to look at here just to preserve ourselves from harm. So that's what I would say. And you would, Andrew, you would want to pursue the people that you have like a natural gravity towards. Like if there's a guru here, I don't think so. But you got somebody over here, oh yeah, there's something, a little bit of gravity there. Well, then you kind of spend some time there and you kind of listen and you kind of follow the gravity and say, well, that sort of makes sense, or I don't get that yet. That's okay. You just want to kind of have some guardrails up, not to chain or handcuff you from doing things, but to explain what options are and why we would want to exercise an option. And if it doesn't make any sense, well, then go ahead and do it your way. And then you'll come back, once the scar tissue's there, and then we could talk about how you could have avoided it. That's what I would really suggest, and you find somebody that you trust, and that you really, they're not a pontificator, they're not bravado, they don't broadcast, anything other than that there's a resonant spirit, that there's a natural attraction to. Those are the people that you want to spend time around. And then when you're going about life, you kind of wonder, like, and then you start to see your friends. Oh yeah, well, I remember I was talking to Jeff, or Jeff said this, and I see him doing that. Let's see where it goes. Oh, well, it just went exactly where Jeff said, but he didn't think it was going to go there, but yet it did. So then you get a piece that you can put in your library, right? And so that's the way that I suggest that we, again, kind of, the shortcut is the process, is the way that we should look at it. Well, what's the process? Well, it's living life, and it's spending some designated protected time in the space of like elevated conversation where you're not being lectured. See, my daughter never thought I was giving her a lecture, because I wasn't. I was just saying, look, we got to go on record here because you just did something. You know, Dad, I was going 85 miles an hour in the fast lane. I said, well, you know, there's a risk you're going to get caught. And when you get caught, it looks like this. I didn't tell her not to do that. I just explained to her the consequences of what may happen so that it's on record as being that. So that's what I would suggest, Andrew. You know, and I think, you know, we all need friends. Great. Friends have the same problem, right? So they're not really a good source of, they're a good source of support and sympathy and empathy, but they may not be the best source of advice because they usually or often don't have the experience to be able to share something that can put us in a place of empowerment and avoidance rather than deepening the problem or indecision, or worse yet, inspiring us to do a very abrupt, impulsive action that was driven by impulse that doesn't work out so well. So that's what I would suggest.
So something that we've been talking about a lot in the Wolf Den is Allegiance Capital in the admin group. And Maddie Dubs had talked to you, and we had a big discussion about it. It was really cool. And from that, what it sounds like a way to think about it is to put yourself in a position where you're getting self-applied allegiance capital. Like you're putting yourself, people who are wiser than you, in a position that you think is where you're going in life, business, whatever, so that their experiences prepare you for what you're going to experience. And then when you see it come to pass, whether you chose to listen to the advice or not, that's a piece of wisdom in your library, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it generally only becomes real once you suffer the downside consequences without doing it. You know, that's learning the hard way. And so Allegiance Capital is something I coined 20 years ago. You know, that's my concept. I don't know if you knew that or not, but you know, that's something I came up with 20 years ago or so. And, you know, that's been an ongoing topic that Nick and I have a lot of conversation together about a lot of different things. And so let me explain Allegiance Capital from my perspective. Allegiance Capital is more than just doing what you say you're going to do. It's a lot more than that. You know, Allegiance Capital is your understanding how to inspire trust in you by doing natural things that people would perceive to provide a trust in you that they would support by doing whatever is asked of them in the relationship, knowing that you can do something for them that they can't do for themselves. So let's say in a business sense, I'm the boss. Okay, great. So then I can't do everything myself. I need help. Therefore, I have some people that are working under me, and they will give a percentage of themselves to what has to go right for me that's under their jurisdiction based on their trust in me. That they trust me that I will deliver to them something of value that they can't give themselves. To the extent at which they trust me, they will give that proportion of effort and time to me. And for example, how would I build that trust? Well, I would build the trust because I know what they want. I know that they want to be acknowledged. So if I take the time, like let's say in a meeting or something, and I say, well, you know, a great example of that was Andrew, when Andrew did X. And then Andrew feels acknowledged, and I was the one that called it out. So you have greater trust in me because I called it out. You know, another example of Allegiance Capital. Again, that means that allegiance means you will give a loyalty to me, and that will be applied towards helping me get to a place that I would like to go to so that we both win. And it's like, it's not a manipulation. So let's say that I show up, I'm Jeff, right? So I show up like this. So let's say Jeff shows up in a suit and tie when Jeff doesn't wear suit and ties. Well, then that disempowers trust. It's like, I don't trust him, man, because wait a minute, who is he? You know, is he the coach or is he something else? I'm confused here. So there's got to be a consistency of presence of being where there's a predictability and a certainty and a reliability of like the individual. Another part of this of allegiance. Can you see how this works now? And I'm hoping that this is really deepening the definition and the understanding of what this really means. So another example would be like, if I show up and I use all these big doctor words and stuff, well, people are going to say, well, he can't possibly understand it because he doesn't talk like us. All right. So if I show up and I have a vocabulary that's similar enough, but not the same as everybody else, and people will say, well, he's one of us, because he shows up like us, but he's not us. And he kind of dresses enough not to be weird. And the language that he uses isn't this guy that thinks highly of himself, but he's freely exchanging. Well, okay, well, he's one of us. So therefore, he understands us. And because he understands us, then I trust him more. So you can see that I believe that there's a much bigger side to this than simply doing what you say you're going to do. It's bigger than that. It's intentional, not as a manipulation, but it's intentional in creating affinity that's real, that allows people to come together in unity. And when people come together in unity, then the output potential of the group is highly amplified. And that's the only way that exponential output can happen, because if people don't trust you, then they're going to have 1 foot in the relationship and 1 foot out, but they're not going to tell you that. You don't know that. They may not even know it, but yet that's what they're thinking. Like, how far can I possibly go with this? I think we all do that with everybody, and we may not know that, but that's why we got to keep it clean, in my opinion, not as manipulation, because that's an abuse of power, but we're showing up as it really is. So I hope that kind of deepens a bit this idea of allegiance capital. Again, I created it with the specific observation that, no one wins alone. We need team, we need collaboration. It's all built on trust. And well, how do we get trust? Do we get trust by giving a guy the parking spot for the employee of the month? Or do we do that by going over to somebody and say, hey, Jeff, I need some help. Can you help me? And then the person helps me, and then they feel like, wow, the boss came to me and asked for help. That's awesome, man. Like, I feel like, I got empowered. He acknowledged me as a useful, honorable person. So that's kind of what we're talking about. So I hope that, Andrew, gives you a little bit more insight into the allegiance capital side of things.
Yeah, it does. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, I love Matty Dubb. Is great. As a matter of fact, I'm going to talk to him in about 15 minutes, as a matter of fact. Yeah. So any other questions here? I'm loving the questions too, by the way. Thank you, everybody.
Callie, if you have one, I'll let you go. I have one, but I want to make sure I let you cover your bases before Penelope wakes up.
Sure. I think people have a superpower when they're in survival mode. And I'm wondering, how do you carry over that person, right? Because we're all these wonderful people in survival mode. So my question is how do you carry over those characteristics, qualities into your everyday life? And then the opposite is, how do you stop continuously living in survival mode?
Can you please define survival mode in this conversation?
I guess another way to say it is like when your back is against the wall, or when you're in a pressure cooker.
Do you mean people will come together to work together? Or do you mean in a human mindset, like they go into attack mode?
Oh, okay. I understand your question. So I think in the example of survival mode being a superpower, meaning that like you just accomplish great things that you otherwise couldn't do if you weren't back against the wall. And then being constantly in survival mode is where you kind of are in defense and attack mode.
It's unsustainable. You're going to blow, or you will attract. It's not possible to live a life of high value and contribution if you're in survival mode, because survival is not about excellence. Survival is about survival. It's like a fight to the death is what it is. And when we're in this incredible battle all the time, we don't think straight. Thinking straight comes from purposeful application of energy towards a specific outcome, knowing the path to come from. I will agree that, again, survival, like let's say you're being assaulted, well, you better have a superhuman power to address that. But being backed into a corner, that should never be, if a person's backed into the corner, that's their normal, it's a mismanaged life for sure. That they're not in control of their day. And there's always ways of teasing that out, but that's kind of really what that ultimately means, at least in my sphere there. And I'll also say that our natural way of being, angry and blame, pouting, afraid, that's our natural state of being. That's how we're born. We're not necessarily born to win. I mean, we could be born to kill, to be able to hold our territory when we're under siege. That's survival. So again, when we're talking about a higher level, which means that what we're producing is demonstrating the best that humanity can offer, that we all have access to, and it does create value to others, and it creates a life of meaning and purpose to us, well, then that's really outside of the survival domain. Fighting for what's right, to be able to maintain a freedom to explore certain things could be considered survival, but that's survival to be able to preserve things that are good. And if you look at the way life is designed, there's this terminology called entropy. You may already know what that is, but entropy in the natural physical universe is a state of natural decay that's inherent in the physical reality that we live in. And unless energy is put into the maintenance of where we are, then things always start to backslide and disintegrate. Therefore, all the good things in life, they don't self-perpetuate. They require a continuous application of to keep and maintain. And as long as we're applying them consistently, it takes a lot less time and effort to keep what you got as it did to get originally. And that's why we all think that we're going to arrive at some point where everything self-perpetuates. Well, it doesn't. All the good stuff has got to be continuously maintained. Otherwise, there's a backslide. Most people's lives are, lose 50 pounds, gain 50, I mean, that's an example of the yo-yo, right? Like things that are targets that we set out for ourselves, it takes time and effort to maintain it. It doesn't self-perpetuate. And we just have to take that as part of the way that the physical universe, in our experience in this dimension, that's just the way it is. We didn't ask for it, but it's just part of it. So, therefore, I think that that's important to remember, because the human mindset doesn't think that. It thinks, well, at a certain point, everything's going to be awesome and I'm going to coast. Well, that's not true, because every second the context is changing. And see, you don't know that you're going to change as an individual, because at 20, you're going to think a lot different than you are at 30. You can't believe that yet, but you're gonna. And you can't believe at 30 that you're going to think anything other than you're thinking at 30 when you get to 40, but you do. And there are these things that activate in advance that we can't believe is we can't believe is possible. But yet when we get there, we realize, you know what, there was something there where I'm not thinking like I was. That's why we kind of never feel like we arrive, because how come we always seem like we're headed somewhere? Can't we ever pause? Well, I guess you could, but minimum energies got to be put into what you've got to keep it. It's just the way that it's designed.
Cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we need, I think, in that regard, we do need to make good choices, or let's put it this way: we need to make informed choices. We need to be aware of our options and decide where we're going to put our time and energy, because those things are, always in consumption that we kind of can't get back. And purposeful application of those precious resources does matter. And then there's a whole conversation about, what should I be doing, so on and so forth. But that's not what we're talking about, like in this instance. And I'll also say this, is that Me personally, I think the motivation behind what we do does matter. I think if our motivation is to be a manifester of our talents and to honor those, I think that's a good thing, because then we're playing on our side of the playing field. But if we're doing things to prove everybody else wrong, we're not playing our game. We're playing their game. And when we play their game, because there is an animosity or a tension to be able to prove someone wrong, I think that motivation consumes a lot of time and energy, and it takes us off our game, that can detract from the momentum that we could gather to create repeat successes that represents what our talents are capable of producing.
That was
Cool.
great.
Yeah, that was really great. Thanks so much.
You're so welcome.
So I know we have just a few minutes left, Dr. Jeff, and so I would, I kind of want to wrap up with like a second, like an overview of a lot of what we're speaking about, and just by, and speaking about like survival mentalities and states of being and human mindset. I'm curious just to hear from you, and even you just going over like your time being a huge advantage to you. Was there ever a point in your life that you felt as if you had a more embedded state of awareness within you around the difference between when you were in that human, because we all have it, right? That human mentality versus the champion's mind. And I think something that has just been really useful for me is just knowing the difference, right? Like never expecting that that human mindset is not going to come back and knock at my door, but if I can know the difference, I feel as if I can kind of master the game. And so I'm just curious if you can wrap up with, if there ever was a time that you felt you really understood those two different states of being.
Well, I think I explicitly understand them explicitly, but that understanding doesn't give me a free pass from them, because, I have that every day, because every moment is a battle for control over decision-making between our human mindset that wants to hold us back, keep us small, keep us in survival. We're hardwired for that. That's our natural state of being. We're hardwired for it. Mythology. And then we have the champion's mind. That's the other part of us. And these two are at war with each other 24 hours a day, our entire life, for control over our decision-making. That never goes away. We never get to a place, again, as I said, where things self-perpetuate. There always has to be energy put into it. And as you said earlier in our conversation, Courtney, you said something to the effect that there's all this knowledge out there. Well, I get that, but knowledge doesn't do anything. It's the actions taken based upon the truths that are irrefutable that we can count on. The knowledge unapplied doesn't mean anything. In one of the things that I'm going to say in a couple of weeks here, when I do my next workshop, I'm going to tell everybody, look, you guys have heard it from me before, and I'm going to tell you again. And I know what your human mindset's going to say. Your human mindset's going to say, oh, I've already heard this, therefore I know it. Okay, well, how is it working for you? What have you done with it? Do you really understand it? Well, not really. Okay, well, then the learning to this point is not affected the quality of your life and your productivity and you honoring your talents. So it's okay to restate these things. I was even talking with someone that's, part of the program that Nick and Dan Nicholson and Randy Messingale put together. And this person has been there for years. And they told me today, well, Nick said X, and I've heard this for the last 4 years. But today I got it at the other day when I was in Seattle with him and the crew, I heard it again for the millionth time, and I finally got it. So you can see that human nature makes all these assumptions. That's why what it is, it's a hardwired myth. Oh, I've heard it, therefore I understand it. Or I believe it, therefore I'll manifest it. Well, wait a minute, where'd that come from? I mean, there's no truth to that. There's no evidence of that. It's just the opposite. But yeah, I know it sounds right. Well, yeah, but it doesn't deliver, of course. Well, but yet we think that way. That's correct. That's because we're hardwired to do that. So that's what I see in, I think the mythology of this, Courtney, is the fact that we do believe that at a certain point we'll gain enough momentum where it's cruise control indefinitely forever. And so I'm going to target 50. I'll retire at 50. And once I get there, then it's going to be cruising from that moment out. Why? Yeah, I'm over 2 decades past that. And I'm telling you that it hasn't let up. I'm just better at seeing how every second it wants to get a word in edgewise. And I kind of know what to do to come from my playing field, not from what would happen with me being me being on their stage and it being the puppet master of me. So I think that that's an important point to remember, that we kind of never arrive. We just get a little bit better, a little bit smarter if we're on the right path. I mean, most people, I think, get nuttier the older that they get at a certain point, that I'll get kind of some loose screws and things like that. Maybe I'll even get that, who knows, but that's just, again, like an observation on this. So I hope that our conversation today is, at least touched a thread with people, because I don't have a point that I want to make. I'm just sharing the observation of what I've seen to be true, over the time that I've spent in this life process, like so far. And, I get up every day and I've got 16, 18 hours to decide what I want to do with it. And I fight the same battle as everybody else. And we all do that day in and day out. And if we understand the rules to the game that just are, and we ultimately minimize the scar tissue, learning to align ourselves with the applications that kind of smooth this out a little bit through our understanding, then we've not only contributed to our legacy and our quality of life, but we've also been a living, breathing example that people can look to. That's perhaps what to mirror, to live the difference that we see in their life against what we see in the chaotic lives of most people. So really appreciate the opportunity to spend time with the Luna Den, and really appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jeff. This has been really great. We always appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate the distinction between knowledge. So yeah, thank you again for taking the time. We really appreciate you joining us, and we'll wrap it up there.
Sounds great. Channeling goes a long way.